If you've got hardy annuals, you think about one temperature. If you've got tender annuals or warm weather crops, you think about one type of methodology.
Tips for flower germination.
The number one tip I would give everyone is to use vermiculite. A lot of flowers require light to germinate, and instead of trying to memorize each and every variety that needs light to germinate or doesn't need light to germinate, the best thing you can do is to take a layer of vermiculite. You can buy it for $20 from Home Depot. You can buy a really big bag that'll last you like a whole season. And every time that you germinate or you seed a tray, you put your seeds just on the surface of the soil. You make a very light indent, and then you sprinkle them in, and then put a even layer of vermiculite on top, and that will allow the light to come through.
How is vermiculite different than covering them with soil?
So the soil is going to prevent the light from coming through. It's going to basically be darkness. And there are some flowers, like larkspur, for example, that do need darkness to germinate. Those are the flowers you do need to be aware of, whether it's light or dark. So just memorize the 3 or 4 flowers. Again, sweet pea is another example that needs darkness to germinate. Memorize those and you're set. So in those cases, actually what I do is I will cover the tray with soil after I'm done seeding, and then I will still put vermiculite on top of that. And the reason for that is the vermiculite prevents dampening off. Since I'm growing indoors, I tend to get more dampening off than a lot of other growers get in, say, a greenhouse. So the vermiculite layer on top hedges my bets a lot, and I find that I'm able to prevent the dampening off most of the time.
So in summary, they're crops that require darkness, cover in soil. Crops that require light, cover in vermiculite.
You got it.
When it comes to cut flowers, how much variability is there in terms of seeding to germination time?
There's a lot. There's a lot of variation between different varieties, and you need to be aware of certain crops that are very difficult to grow, like Lisianthus. They take upwards of 12 days to germinate, and then you have to keep them indoors or in their cell trays for even 10 to 12 weeks.
Temperature in germination.
So really, when you think about flowers, cut flowers, you separate them into 2 blocks. You've got your hardy annuals, which are cool weather crops. They can survive light frosts. Those want to be germinated at 70 degrees and even grown on at 70 degrees. And then for your warmer weather crops, all of your tender annuals, you want to grow those, germinate them at around 75 to 85, erring on the 80-85 range, and then grow them on even at 90 degrees.
For people just starting out, is a good cheat sheet to look at the information in the catalog of germination specifics and try and cater your system to that?
So I used to exhaust myself running after that information. And honestly, when you go from say a Johnny's to a Floret to Geoseeds, they all have varying amounts of information, and a lot of times that information is even conflicting. I found that if you want to think about it in terms of cheat sheet, you just pick these categories, you pick these types of flowers, and you think of them, your germination temperatures, and you're growing on that way. So like I was saying before, if you've got hardy annuals, you think about one temperature. If you've got tender annuals or warm weather crops, you think about one type of methodology.
So the basic filter, if we're thinking about your system here, does it need to germinate at a warmer temperature or cooler temperature? Does it need light or does it not? And if you observe those 2 factors, does that solve most of the problems?
That would take care of, I would say, close to 90% of the problems, absolutely.
Flowers that have low germination rate, you overseed?
Yep. Some flowers will have germination rates as low as 50%, or even better yet, there's a lot of seed packets that you'll order from companies like Geoseed. We really love ordering our flowers from Geoseed because it's very inexpensive. They don't have germination rates on their packets at all. So I will go as high as 4 to 5 seeds per cell.
What about cold stratification? Is it ever necessary, and if so, how do you do it?
So there are a few crops that you want to cold stratify. Larkspur or Delphinium. The names are kind of interchangeable. One is like a perennial, one is an annual, one is strictly an annual. Anyways, with those guys, you want to stick them in the fridge for 2 weeks. And it's the same with Bells of Ireland, which is a very popular foliage. Again, you want to stick them in the fridge for 2 weeks. Another thing I would point out is that there's a few seeds you want to soak, and predominantly sweet peas. You want to make sure that when you get them, you soak them for at least 12 hours. Some people just do it like in the evening when they're going to bed, and then when they wake up, they'll seed them.
So in your current setup, it's about 10 inches from the top of the flat to the bottom of the light. At what point do you start to transplant these crops out into the field? And do you find that they get leggy at all?
Very little legginess, if none at all, now that we have this system sort of dialed in. And in terms of transplanting them, the lights don't make them grow exceptionally fast unless you have both sets of lights on. So one way that you can control how, like let's say you don't have the opportunity, it's raining a lot and you can't get out there right now into your ground, you can just crank it down to the lower light setting, one set of bulbs on instead of both set of bulbs on, and that'll slow their growth. And generally I like to transplant them out when they've got 2 sets of cotyledons. It varies a lot from 2 sets of cotyledons, 2 sets of leaves, but it varies a lot from flower to flower. Generally, I just want them to be stocky and able to handle the transplant, especially if it's hot outside. I like them to be a little bit bigger. In the cool weather, they can they're not as subject to heat stress or to dying off quickly. But yeah, I'm generally looking for 2 sets of leaves or 4 leaves.